Our next presentation is Michael Philip Wojewoda. And now, this is the information that I've had sent to me, and he'll carry it from here. He's introduced as and everybody knows Michael, but yeah, for this presentation, he's a Steinberg VST Pro guru, but he has other thoughts on studio client interconnectivity that he would like to speak with. So, Michael, take the show, take the floor.
Thanks very much, Earl, and John and Mariana. Thanks so much. Actually, Mariana brought up a really interesting point that I feel sort of is an overarching issue about all of this uh, dealing with the fact that the technology that we're now forced to base most of our communication on is, of course, the IP protocol from ARPANET that was designed to be nuclear bomb proof, right? So the packets were going to get there no matter what facility was destroyed. But they made no provisions in the original design of it for these packets to appear in any kind of meaningful sequence. They all have to arrive. They can arrive out of sequence, they're restitched and then delivered to the end user. And everything that we're doing is, of course, stacked on top of that. So try and reverse engineer all these different ways. But one of the anecdotal things that Mariana's mentioned comes to mind, which is having to also ultimately deal with clients who are not engineers, or and this whole process of what is it that ultimately is really new and really challenging and really different about what we're doing. Like, I will eventually talk about VST Connect. It's great, and there's specifics about it that are useful. But I think the reason I got this gig when I was talking with John with Beetle the other day was I mumbled something about this idea of a third way. If we are, and it seems we are, forced to have this new social structure that's going to be measured in multiple months, possibly years, what would be the way that content creators or those that facilitate production, especially producers and engineers, can continue to engage with clients in a way that makes it desirable for the client to want to continue to have our participation? Because we could all say, well, look, like the entire world is going to go back to just everyone goes into their room with their laptops, they make the music that they do with the tools they have at hand, and they release it. But that sense of isolation is both palpable now, and I keep thinking about what the most important element of collaboration is creatively, on top of all the technical issues. And this quote by the late Bruce Fairbairn comes to mind when he was asked what was the most important microphone in his arsenal, and he went, "Oh, the talkback mic. It's like the most important one because it's this quality of interaction, both as out of the human condition that we all crave." So I do believe that one of the things that needs to be sorted out, that's really critical, on top of managing to get the quality of the WAV files transferred somehow, and being able to assemble things after the fact and produce polished, finished products, is in terms of the process. The great challenge is going to be having artists feel like there still are people who are facilitating and shepherding and doing all those things that music production, or any kind of production, I'm biased towards music production, but of course it applies everywhere. And so the idea of a third way is like the stages of grieving. Like we're trying to struggle, and we're going through we're angry, and then you're negotiating, blah blah blah. But eventually, I think the key is to stop struggling against the straps and go, well, what is the new way? And from that, what new aesthetic is going to start emerging? One of the first ones that's starting to emerge, of course, is sort of desperately sad lo-fi audio that the greatest multi-platinum stars are doing as they perform live. Hearing Lady Gaga with a crappy microphone is like, wow, that's awesome, and somewhere from that, this idea of being whatever it takes. So the first challenge that comes to mind is, how do we mitigate the fact that at the client end, at the performer end, is zero or limited engineering skills? What are the things we can do to mitigate that? I mean, if it comes to guitar work, well, you can somehow maybe get them to get a high Z input that you then receive a DI feed. Then you have all these virtual amps with this ability to reamp. So, or if you're trying to get vocals, if they don't have good quality, I keep thinking of ideas like Townsend Lab style microphones where all the clients are going to need to do is just turn up the gain a few notches enough so that if they maximum volume, they're not clipping. And that's all you got to do. It's like blow into this hole, Satchmo. Just that's all you got to do. And you would acquire these things again via these remote packages. And once it's in your end, of course, it does produce far more work to then perhaps have to reprocess them and run these things through preamps and shape them so that they start to sound legitimately like music sounded before, when we could all get together and rub shoulders and go into studios and do it. But the thing I feel about this third way is both in terms of how you pitch working with clients, is that when we run into these difficulties, that they're no longer just, I mean, we can bemoan them, but the idea is to truly embrace it and go, all right, let's be light on our feet. Let's really think about, if that's the set of conditions, what kind of wild creativity is possible with that in mind. I wanted to also mention one other thing before I just quickly talk about the software that I'm using. But this idea of, just looking at my notes. Yeah, like again, things about Zoom, which is this fantastic technology, but because of the IP protocol, one of the reasons this video conferencing software works so well is, of course, it will compress and time expand without changing pitch. With the fact that some packets are arriving out of sequence and they have to wait, so they'll slow down the video feed and audio feed, but because within a degree, the human ear will. Millions of years of evolution have allowed us to tolerate that and not feel like it's too odd sounding, or it'll speed up if they have a glut of packets. And so this protocol is excellent for seeing a face and reading a little bit about emotion, but of course it cannot be used at all in any way for meaningful music exchange that requires accurate tempo. Let alone the low quality of the audio signal. Okay, so I don't want to take up too much time. So let me just jump in and just talk about what I've been using. Because I've been a Cubase user since my Atari ST in the 80s, I mean, I have Pro Tools. We all have Pro Tools, but Cubase is something I'm very, very familiar with, and it has always been my main axe. Whenever I finish productions, I'm often transferring files out of Pro Tools and I work in Cubase. So for me, it's a no-brainer. And it's ironic that up in the upper right corner in the software, there was this iCloud options, which I always thought of as a curiosity, or, well, it's used for voiceover work, to get producers doing, sessions between New York and LA, and I never thought much of it. With, of course, we should all, as Anthony said, we should all have a drink and acknowledge the changes that have happened, both in terms of society and medicine and stuff like that. That then became instantly the portal, sort of the only answer. And what's interesting, for instance, on the Steinberg side, is I immediately went out and I bought the Pro version, because there's two versions. There's with that software platform is this sort of SE, which I'll explain how it works. But the Pro version includes this ability to, even when you're working in real time, to then pull the HD files off of the client's computer, and then it's lined up into the tracks, automatically replacing the sort of MP3 real-time stuff with the other ones. But let's see, this is what happens when I lose my train of thought. Oh yeah, but Steinberg, so I went and bought it. I bought the Pro version, which was $200. And literally 2 days ago, I got a note from Steinberg in my email saying, they've reduced it to $75 and they're refunding me because I was an early adopter. So on the part of the software company itself is recognizing the importance and the need, and I guess it's their brushstroke to try and not only encourage it, but maybe not just do this as a shameless capitalist venture, but to, kind of get in the game, which I thought was great. All right, so again, the last little bit, I'm going to send you in the chat a link to a really great video that I didn't make. I could sit here and describe all the details of how this software works, but this particular um, video, you'll see it over there in the chat. YouTube link does a really good job of explaining how the software works. But what I will say is the principle of it is there is on the studio side, you have an element within your DAW that is this remote recording portal. There is a free front end called VST Connect Performer that no one needs to use their own DAWs. They download for free from the Steinberg site this other end. They attach their audio interface to it, and all the work, all the balancing, everything, the mixes, everything is dealt with from the studio side. And the principle of it is pretty basic. You're basically, at my end, I have my mix, which I send as a Q mix to create a stereo premix. And there is a stereo MP3 real-time stream that is sent into the cloud. At the performer end, they're using their front end. They receive this audio, and then depending on what overdub they're doing, whether so far, like I said, with high Z inputs and things like that have been really helpful, vocals and whatnot, and they perform along. They send in return a simple stereo stream of their vocal, but the synchronization all happens in the cloud. So and so the perception at the performing side is that they're performing perfectly in sync, and at the studio side, I'm hearing they're performing perfectly in sync. And it's not until I hit stop that the real delays between us are revealed. Like, for instance, even though the talkback microphone is one of the most important parts of it, it is the most fatiguing part of the process, because there is simply, whether you can hear the spill in their headphones or we're working without headphones like I do, I just have my studio dim minus 60 dB to try and reduce the fact that the delay is almost like 60s moon launch. It's like really quite severe sometimes, the delay in my talkback, measured in many seconds. So by the time I finish a phrase, I let go of the talkback, I'll sort of hear the last part of my phrase with them. And that can add a kind of by the end of the day, there's a kind of a crazy difficulty associated with that. But in record mode, this perception of perfect synchronization, listening to kind of low bandwidth MP3 streaming stuff seems to be fairly robust, as long as the internet connection on both sides is robust enough. And then, like I said, what's really lovely about the way this software works is that once I hit stop and I hit the talkback and I continue to critique, which I feel is the most important part of this game, is that the human interaction is clearly, I do believe artists crave it, and all humans crave it. And so that's the part that I think matters most, because really you could just send them a rough mix, say overdub to this, send me the waves, line it up. But that's missing the point. The point, I think, of this is to critique a performance just like you would behind the glass with a talkback mic. So check out the YouTube link that describes the software quite well. I know that it requires a commitment on the part of using that particular platform, which I know is not necessarily, everyone has their own flavor. People, Ableton Live and Pro Tools and Logic and all these sorts of things. And I know that there are other companies that have some things and are scrambling to do this. But what's nice about this setup is that it's up to 16 channels. So for instance, I could have a multi-mic setup while they're performing. I just hear this low bandwidth MP3, which I do a little premix for myself. And when it's done, I hit a button, it draws the HD files, which are recorded locally on their drive. And then just in my DAWs, these tracks start appearing and they slowly start pulling across. And sometimes that can happen while you're critiquing or having a discussion, or you can do it at the end of the session. So I'm going to leave it at that for now, and hand it over to Earl again. Thank you, everybody.
Michael, thank you so much for joining us on that. So